Number 1. First beer. I never got along with my father. There were issues from the beginning growing up. I liked to play with girls' toys with my sister and my cousin, and he always gave me a hard time for doing that. Fortunately, my mom was a much better parent and let me play with any of the toys that I wanted. Because of that rift with my dad, which lasted until he passed away, I never had that father-son experience of him having my first beer. Hell, and started going to clubs, I always had a mixed drink. I was in my mid-20s and I still never had my first beer. But of course it wasn't something I ever really thought about. I just didn't care. Then one spring I accompanied my mom to visit my grandma's house. We had a lot of relatives that always congregated at my grandma's house. My relatives were really rural. Hell, my grandma still has an outhouse to this day. Then one spring, my uncle lived in an old shack out in the hills, even more rural than my grandma did. He was quite the drinker and user of drugs, and he always was a bit weird when he was drinking. He always listened to bluegrass music and drove his pickup truck throughout the hills when he was drunk. Well, I don't know what got into me that day. Maybe I was just bored, or I was getting nostalgic for when I was younger and went out in the country. I used to love riding in the back of a pickup truck when I was a kid, but I ended up telling my uncle that I never had my first beer, and he never really had a son that he could share a first beer with. I mean, he did have a son, but he almost never spent time with him growing up. Okay, I really should make this very clear. I in no way advocate drinking and driving. I think it is an incredibly stupid thing to do. It didn't strike me odd at the time because I grew up around people who did this. Really, every male adult that I grew up around did it, so it just seemed normal. I cannot tell you how tickled pink he was when I told him that I never had a beer before. Actually, he might kick my ass if he knew the comment about tickled pink, so please just forget that part. Anyway, he decided to take me for a ride and let me have my first beer. He had this really small pickup truck because he really didn't make much money. I guess that's why he was drinking Old Milwaukee. So yeah, that was my first beer. I remember driving through the hills, sticking my elbow out the window like I'd seen my uncles and such do. There was so much out there to see. We had driven pretty far out and were having a great time. It started out nice and bright, and it was so nice driving through that area. Up and down the hills, all of the trees, the breeze, from having the windows rolled down instead of using the AC. And that was also when my uncle asked me if I'd ever smoked a joint before. Of course I hadn't, and I let him know. He told me that if I wanted to, he had a place that we could go. We drove for a while, and eventually the road sort of gave way to what couldn't be described as a real road at all. I mean, it was obvious that people had driven there before, but rather than a road, it was just tire tracks. In the middle of the tire tracks was a grown-over, leaf-covered center, and there was really only barely enough room on the sides that I kept expecting us to hit a tree. Eventually I noticed a house up in the distance. Well, it was one of those old silver-looking mobile homes, probably from the 50s. He couldn't drive all the way up to the trailer, though. He parked out a bit and told me that he would be right back. We were probably a good 100 feet away from the trailer. I watched as my uncle lightly jogged up to the trailer. Then he quickly knocked on the door. I noticed the door open and he walked in. At first I thought that he had opened the door and let himself in. It was something that people around those parts did all the time. I waited for quite a while. I don't really have a way of telling you how long I did wait. Having a couple of beers by that point, I was feeling a bit off, as you would expect. But the one thing I can tell you is that it was getting close to dusk. There wasn't a clock or anything inside the truck. I kept waiting, wondering what was taking so long. I thought that perhaps my uncle had decided to have a beer with the guy that he was visiting. I had experienced that very often with family members. Deciding to have a beer, and then going through about 6 or more of them before coming back and doing what they're supposed to be doing. After a while, the door of the trailer finally opened, but it wasn't my uncle that came out of the place. It was a very scraggly looking guy that I had no idea who it was. He was really creepy looking, but having family from a rural area, it wasn't surprising to see people like him. But what did surprise me, and actually made me very nervous, was that the guy came out, walking toward my uncle's pickup truck. I'm not really good with people that I don't know. I absolutely am not good with these hermit types who live out in the hills. Hell, even my country relatives sometimes make me nervous. Anyway, the guy came up to the truck and leaned on the door. He asked me who I was, and I told him. I asked where my uncle was. He was evasive on the comment. He then began asking me if I wanted to come in and have a beer with him and my uncle. I really didn't. If you had seen this trailer, you wouldn't have wanted to either. It looked like something you would expect to see from a 1970s horror film. I thanked him for the offer, but told him I wasn't interested. I would just wait for my uncle in the truck. Well, he told me that I might have a long wait, and I didn't know how to take that. It was a very uncomfortable thing to say, and it gave me a bit of a shudder. I responded that I didn't mind waiting a bit. I'm just uncomfortable going into homes of people I didn't know. The guy did something that really annoyed me when people do it. He introduced himself by name and stuck his hand out, as if that was supposed to try and make me know him personally. But he kept being insistent, and the more he did, the more I just wanted to get as far away from him as possible. And then I noticed the door of the trailer open, and I looked past the guy, expecting to see a friend of the creepy guy trying to come out and help him. But what I noticed was my uncle stumbling out of the house, and he was holding part of his chest. The guy noticed me look behind him and he turned. He also noticed my uncle. As my uncle stumbled closer, he turned and went over to him. The two began to fight, and I was confused as to what to do. But even though it looked like my uncle was injured somehow, he was a lot bigger than the guy, and he was able to get the better of him. My uncle laid him flat, and then got over to the car. "Get over," my uncle told me. "I need you to drive, and get us out of here." I slipped over to the driver's side, and my uncle got into the truck. The weird guy had gotten back up and came after the truck. He was able to get to it as I turned, and actually tried to climb into the bed. I was moving, so I hit the brake, and then the gas quickly, which caused him to lose his grip and fall off the back of the truck. I began driving to get out of there as quickly as I could. I had a very hard time finding my way out of that area and back to my grandparents' house. I was still a little tipsy from the beer, and thought if I could get there safely, a completely sober driver could drive my uncle to the hospital. What had happened was that my uncle had gone in to get weed from the guy, but they had gotten into an argument over money that the guy claimed my uncle already owed him. After my uncle gave him money, he didn't give my uncle any of the weed, claiming it was a back payment. My uncle got pissed, tried to get his money back, and the two struggled, and my uncle got stabbed. My uncle ended up being fine. Other than his injury, though, there was something about this that stuck with me for quite a while. If the guy had stabbed my uncle, then what was he intending on doing if I went into the house? He'd invited me in, and obviously I would have seen my uncle stabbed. He obviously had very ill intentions for the both of us. And I haven't had a beer since. It has nothing to do with the experience, though. I just think it tastes nasty. Number 2, the storm. I used to always like thunderstorms. I liked every aspect of them. I liked the thunder, the lightning, the dark, the wind, the rain. There's always been something about a thunderstorm that is just so appealing. I was never that kid who was scared to death of the thunder when he was a child. I looked forward to it. When I was a teenager, I moved my bed so that it was facing opposite of a window, looking across the street at the other homes, mainly one house. Whenever a storm was coming, I would plop myself down on the bed and just watch the storm. If the wind was not blowing toward my house, I would actually open the window just a bit, so the sound of the wind and the rain would not be drowned out. On the day the story happened, there was quite a nasty storm brewing up outside. There were dark black and green clouds moving in that took up the entire sky. The wind was just pounding my house. When I was watching the storm, more than once, I watched the shingle from our roof fly off the house and get totally blown away. Looking it up on the weather report, we were apparently getting gusts of wind that topped 70 miles per hour. I was 16 years old at the time. Also, I was home by myself. My parents had gone to visit some cousins of theirs for the weekend, and I didn't feel like going. I had a lot of homework to do, and I was trying to get into a good college, so fortunately, they let me remain home by myself. So I got my laptop, propped up some pillows on my bed, and lay back against them, and decided to watch the storm. I had some snacks and a drink and just watched the free show that was happening outside my window. The wind and the thunder were extremely loud. I had never experienced something like this before, and it was really, really wild. I don't really remember how long I had been sitting there, alternating between looking at my laptop and doing my work, and looking up and out the window. What I do recall, however, is looking up and out the window when I heard an extremely loud noise and felt my house shake worse than it had been all day, and by that point the storm had been going on for quite a while. When I looked up, I saw the scariest thing that I'd ever seen in my life. The house across the street got torn into pieces. It happened so quickly that, if I had not looked up when I did, I would have missed it. Debris went flying all over the place, and only moments after that, my bedroom window shattered as pieces of the house across the street flew into my house, hitting it all over. It took me a moment to realize that I was witnessing a tornado, and it was right there across the street from me. I don't know how long I was on my bed, trying to get over the shock of what I was seeing. I don't think I was thinking very much as it was going on. All I knew was that I had to get to our basement as quickly as possible. And part of me hesitated, thinking I should go out and try to see if the people who lived in the house I just watched get blown up were okay. But that would involve me running outside right into a tornado. As I was getting off my bed, getting my shoes on because there was glass everywhere, I grabbed my laptop and I ran into the other room. We had a fully finished, completely underground basement, which I had always learned was the safest place to be during a tornado. It was then that I heard the tornado siren begin going off, which I would later reflect on that it was the moments after I had watched the house get destroyed that it first came on. Power was out too. I guess I should have already mentioned that, but then I wasn't really thinking about it, so the basement was very, very dark. But fortunately my laptop still had a charge, so it wasn't completely dark under there. I went over into a corner in the basement because I sort of remember that being the thing I'm supposed to do. I was terrified, and I couldn't even tell you how much time had passed. Everything had gone so fast. It was loud hearing the siren and the wind and what I assumed was the tornado, but it sounded like a freight train was running through the middle of my house. The basement did not have any windows, so that was safe, but it also made it impossible to know what was going on outside. I just cringed and waited for my house to fall down on me. When the storm settled down a bit, I got up the nerve to go try and go back up to the first floor. I was surprised because I was expecting my house to have been destroyed, but it wasn't. It was a mess with broken windows and very wet, but not destroyed. I checked outside and several other houses were completely destroyed. Fortunately, there were no fatalities, only minor injuries. My appreciation for storms waned after that. To this day, I can still pull up the image of that house being torn apart in my head. I am very fortunate to not know what it felt like to be in that house. Number 3. Dark. I'm trying to think of the best way I want to tell this story. You would have to first know that when the story happened I was pretty poor. Although I had enough money to rent a decent house, I didn't really have enough to constantly keep it repaired every time something went wrong with it. I should fall back on my landlord to take care of things like that, I know. But he is not the handiest guy in the world. In fact, the reason that part of this story happened was because one of the bathrooms adjacent to my bedroom did not have a fan in it. After a while, the lack of the fan began to have more than one effect. The linoleum of the floor began to get weak. After a while, a hole actually opened up in the floor. It was not a huge hole or anything, but my roommate did get hurt when his foot went through the floor. But the thing that bothered me the most was something else. One day when I was doing some rearranging in my bedroom, I needed to take a rest. So I sat down on the floor and I leaned against the wall. The wall turned out to be really soft in that one spot, since it was on the other side of the bathroom. The sheetrock caved in and left a hole with a diameter of about 1.5 feet in the wall. Now, I had never patched up a wall before, just like I'd never fixed a bathroom floor before. And I decided that as annoying as those two things were, I would just try and live with them. And honestly, it wasn't hard to do. I was able to put something in front of the hole so it wasn't distracting. And I put some board down over the hole in the bathroom. For me, everything else was fine. This began happening maybe about a year after the hole in the wall was made. My bed sits on the back wall, with the head of the bed on the wall that the hole is in. I tend to do a lot of work on my bed. I am sort of poor, like I mentioned, and I don't have a lot of furniture yet. I have a stand with my computer on it that is between me and the hole in the wall. Well, I was just working on my computer one evening when I was suddenly caught off guard by what sounded like a human cough in my bedroom. I hadn't turned the light on, so the only light I had was from my computer screen. I immediately tried thinking of what the sound could have been, but I couldn't really think of anything other than a human cough. It is what it really sounded like. I got up, turned the light on, and looked around. There was no one, nor nothing in my room that could explain the sound that I heard, so I decided not to worry about it, and that it was likely just the house settling. I didn't hear anything else weird that night, so I wrote it up as just a figment of my imagination. It wouldn't be the first time. The following night, I had forgotten about the weird coughing noise. I was once again working on my computer in the dark, and it caught me off guard again, of course just like the night before. I tried my best to explain it to myself what was going on. Maybe it was my hard drive making a strange sound. I'd only heard it twice, so I could be trying to hear something that wasn't really there. I think I'm explaining that how I mean. About 20 minutes passed by, and then I really wasn't listening for it anymore. I was just back to my work, and that's when I heard it again. And I couldn't figure out what it was, because once again it sounded like a human being coughing. And it was sort of disturbing. So I listened again, and once again, a significant amount of time passed where I came to the conclusion that it must have been the hard drive. After that night, I didn't hear the noise again. It had still been making me feel on edge, but it was slipping my mind at that point. However, at one point I did hear something else. It sounded like something was moving around in my room. It made me uneasy, especially after remembering the cough noises. I picked up my phone and turned the flashlight on. Shining it over at the area where the hole was, my heart skipped a beat when I saw some black, shapeless form over by the hole in the wall. It was by the hole, then quickly moved into the hole and into the wall. I immediately got up and ran over to the light and flipped it on. I didn't do that often, but I was scared by what I had just seen. I went over to the hole and very slowly and very cautiously moved to it and tried to look inside, scared as to what I might see. But there was nothing there, just the emptiness between the two walls. I was scared though, and I didn't feel comfortable sleeping in that room that night. The next day I went to the Home Depot and I bought something to patch the hole in the wall up. It was my first time ever doing that, and I made some mistakes, but I had to get it done after what I had seen. I was scared going forward too, but after a while of not hearing the cough, seeing anything or hearing anything moving around, I eventually was able to calm down. And ever since I have gotten better at being in there alone. I never experienced it again, and will patch up any future holes in the wall right away. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.